I don't want no effing data center in my backyard. You're watching TechStrong, gang. Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. Well, you know, when you get those long 3-day holidays, it takes a Tuesday to get back into things. And by today, hopefully you're back on your normal even keel as we head into post-Labor Day. You know, it's for me, it was always school's back in town. Summer's over. Let's get busy. And let's get busy here on TechStrong, gang. Today we've got a great show and some great gang members. Let me introduce you to them. We have Kate Scarcella. Kate, welcome. I haven't seen this gentleman in a while. My friend Guy Currier. Guy, good to see you. Chris Blask, of course, joining us as always, and fresh off his Mexican vacation. They let him back in. Mitch Ashley. Hey, Mitch, how are you? And of course, we're joined by the dean of all Yankee fans, Mike Vizard. And of editors too, but hey, Mike.
It's going to be a tough September, man. I'm looking at the schedule and I'm like going, oh boy.
It's a tough September schedule, but they're playing well.
Mm-hmm. We'll see.
We'll talk offline about it more, but Ben Rice.
Go Blue Jays.
Yep. All right. So, Mike, let's jump into things today. You know, it seems like we're building data centers, or we want to build data centers, or we're pledging to build data centers, or we're hallucinating about data centers. But we're building data centers the size of Manhattan and just, you know, encompassing thermonuclear devices and hydroelectric plants and everything else. So what's the deal?
Well, let's see how that all turns out, because the folks at Data Center Watch are reporting that, well, local groups, of which there are something now of 142 of them, have managed to get $18 billion worth of these projects canceled, and 46 billion are further delayed. So there might be more cancellations coming down the pike. But it sure looks like to me the local rebellion against the AI empire is starting to form. So are we going to see more of this, Alan? And where are we going to put these data centers?
So look, this is just such a classic NIMBY case, right? We all want these data centers, all these billionaires and sovereign funds and politicians falling over themselves with checks for hundreds of billions of dollars, or at least pledges of hundreds of billions of dollars. And every city wants to be the new Silicon data center capital of the world, whether it's Southwest Texas or Phoenix or Ohio or, you know, the great heartland, and everybody wants these data centers until they're in your backyard. And that's such a typical thing. Yeah, no, it's a great thing. I want all those jobs. We want all that money. It's going to ruin my view. I don't want it. There's going to be a nuclear power plant running it. Forget about it. What can we do? And they go through the usual playbook. Have we done the environmental impact? Have we, you know, looked at all the other things? Have we, you know, do we have lead in our pipes? I mean, they'll go, you know, anyway. And they're valid. I get it. Who wants an ugly data center right outside, you know, some mammoth data center right outside your house, right? You know, that, you don't want that as your view. My fear is, though, that under the current administration, you know, no one cares about the spotted owls and the little darter fish or whatever they're called. They're just going to drill baby Jill. And it may very well be the same thing here.
Mm-hmm.
Chris?
Yep. There may be some of that to it, but look, I've been playing with critical infrastructure for 35 or so years, right? And this is a whole world of told you so coming to roost, because mostly what I see is, the legitimate pushback, and yeah, I agree. Environmentally, we need to account for the costs. And in critical infrastructure, what everybody thinks about is the grid. And the power grid, the North American power grid, is an amazing beast. It is a single creature of titanic proportions. It's been engineered over the last 100 years into what it is. And what it isn't is capable of supporting the kind of systems, the power usage profiles that are being proposed for a lot of these data centers. We talked about this last week with Dan O'Brien, I think, but they're using evaporative cooling, which is wonderful and cheap as long as water is cheap and you can throw it away and turn it into mist, to cool down your data center, which historically it's been for decades and decades where we've seen these things. There are universities and office parks. Not this time. You actually have to account for all the costs. And this is where, ideologically, all of the parties that I belong to come to roost, because this is about writing it down, owning it. And if I want a data center, and I do, then I got to figure out what the actual cost is. Not what the actual dollar is given, whatever the current, economic climate is. The whole thing's the supply chain soup to nuts. And these power systems, you can't just pop up power grids. These take decades. And you can't, let me give it a bit of hope at the end of that. With the kind of dollars we're talking about, yes, you can. We all agree, that, I agree. And I know on this show, we tend to agree that small nuke, kind of things we're talking about, that's lovely. Battery is lovely. There's lots of ways to do things. But at the heart of this story, I think, is evaporative cooling, unrealistic, applications of what's supposed to be cheap technology that just happens to cost the water we all drink. Right? No, that's not good math. That's not good capitalism.
Well, let me just say, these data centers are on a scale unbefore, like nothing we've seen before. And frankly, all the water in the world isn't going to cool them. We need next gen cooling solutions. Right? When we talk about liquid cooled, they're not talking about water. They're talking more like antifreeze kind of things. But
that needs more power. I'm sorry, I didn't really make my point, because we agreed last week. I'm pretty sure it was that. Anyways, we need more power, right? You can be as green as you want.
Power,
I can be green all day.
We need
lots
cooling.
of power. Yes, which needs power, which needs more power than just using water.
Well, that's
so we
the
need
position
even more power.
That's the position I'm going to take on this, which is, this is the thing that will get the power grid upgraded, right? We all talk about our aging infrastructure. You can't live on the infrastructure that we have now. It will force it to be upgraded. And so in that way, I'm all for it. I totally get not in my backyard and get off my lawn kind of thing. I don't want to be living next to a data center, but it's a fact of life. It's going to happen. And we're driving down that road. So let's do it right. Let's really build out the infrastructure to support this, not just for today, but for tomorrow.
And it's not the worst
I'm not
infrastructure.
sure that this is really a story. I think you started down that path, Alan, which is, we've seen this before. I mean, there's no context here. This is so the publisher of this research is a firm called Data Center Watch, which is owned by an AI consulting company, and a legit one. And I'm not saying they're bending numbers or anything, not at all. But where's the context for this? I think that there's an agenda here which is pretty explicit when it comes to Data Center Watch, to expose NIMBYism in data center build-outs and activism.
Yeah. Guy, now that you mention it, I don't know if just Mike Vizard didn't pull this up strictly to have us discussing it on the gang today.
See?
Mm-hmm. As opposed to
he assigned the story. So Mike,
as opposed to any other day.
But why is this not a story? This is far older than NIMBYism. This is like the oldest technological story ever. And it's certainly the oldest and original one in IT, which is, you want to do all this fun software stuff, you have to do hardware build-outs, including resources and all that stuff. And sometimes we're going to get to an example later where the hardware is way ahead. In this case, the hardware is way behind. And, there's no supply. There's insufficient supply for all the demand to build data centers, insufficient supply for appropriate real estate, in part because a lot of these, they want to put data centers where there's already, good network connections, so they can't just put them up in the Arctic like they would do otherwise. There's also power issues. There's all this stuff, right? So like Mitch said, it's going to get built out. I don't think we're missing two contexts here. One is, what are we capable of building in terms of power delivery globally? We're just sitting here going, wow, we just don't have enough. It's a disaster. The sky is falling. Or we're saying, shut up and get out of the way of innovation and let's steamroll over all the problems because of all the benefits that are going to come. So that's one side of how it's not a story. This is just supply and demand in action.
I would disagree on the sense that the level of scale here is phenomenal, and more communities are seeing this and experiencing this in the form of water issues, and they're starting to see electricity costs go up. And as Tip O'Neill once said, all politics is local. And when you start messing around with the local stuff, you'll be surprised how much it will come around and kick you in the head.
And frankly,
but just compare it to, sorry, Kate, I'll definitely let you go. Just compare it to building roads. Takes freaking forever. Nobody wants to bulldoze neighborhoods. They don't want a big fat road right next to them, but they have a congestion problem. So where's the difference? I just don't see it.
Guy, your Bronx upbringing is shining through.
To your point, though, here in New York, we were talking about rethinking about how the Cross Bronx Expressway works because of Robert Moses bulldozed entire neighborhoods in the 50s and 60s.
Exactly.
They determined that
destroyed the Bronx.
Right. So that whole thing might become a tunnel. Who knows?
And the only thing that, talking about it not being a story for this non-story, it's actually appearing in a lot of different, podcasts and other, frankly, other news shows where you have, citizens, gathering together and just saying, no to these data centers. I continue to believe that we have not seen, I can't help but remember over and over again, walking through these huge, where all the mainframes were. And then all of a sudden there was like one mainframe and you saw the footprint of where all these other, mainframes were. I worry that we're rushing to build really, really large data centers without yet fully understanding this capability of where we're going. So that's one major concern. I think looking at the cost more than just the financial cost is really important, especially with resources being where they are today. We don't have unlimited resources. We all know that. So we do have to rethink how we do things. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. And people getting upset about, not in my backyard is legitimate. And we have to think about, or how do we make something more aesthetically suitable? Do we put like a nice park around it or through it or,
Sounds like something out of the New York City Zoning Commission. You can build the biggest building in the world. Just put a couple of benches outside and some trees.
Well, in the early 90s, I started, I had an early .com, SEACHG.com, right? And I remember on Usenet, people complaining that .coms are going to destroy everything. And I think I sort of said what Guy said, and it turned out to be true, right? And I said, well, look, even if all that is true, they will put down so much bandwidth that 0.001% is more than we're ever going to get with academic budgets and so forth. Right. And Mitch, what you said about the as an old school power grid person, if you want to get tens of billions of dollars into your grid, suddenly this is the way. All those projects you thought were a good idea, now's to get approval and lay the,
but guys,
copper everywhere.
Let's just put this into there's a couple of different buckets y'all are hitting here. You like when I say y'all?
Yeah.
It's a real
Yes, I
New
do.
York
Very much
saying
so.
you all.
You and I think is appropriate in this context.
Instead of the conversation
All right,
just had
but
brings
let's
that
put-
Southern Long Island accent.
There's a couple of buckets here. Number one is the issue of the power. Regardless of where we build the data center, we got to bring the power to it. Or we build the power there in the case of, let's say, a container-sized nuclear facility or something. So you
Or
got
hydro.
power, you
Yeah.
got the cooling. Kate, you bring up a point, and I'm not sure it got through to the audience and the rest of us, which is we're building tomorrow's data centers for today's and yesterday's technology. Who knows what tomorrow's technology requirements are going to be? Are we going to need a data center the size of Manhattan to do the kind of workload that we're anticipating gets done? It may be not the case. But anyway, so there's that aspect, there's the power aspect, and then there's the NIMBY aspect, right? I remember why.
Don't forget the connectivity too.
Well, yes, and connectivity, fiber, or however we're
That
connecting.
is probably the most limiting factor, because that's what's causing the 600 data centers in Virginia or whatever.
Right, because it's the
latency.
And I think it's also why we're seeing places that we wouldn't think of as data center central vie for this business, right? And it's going to take all those things coming together for it. And if those people are willing to put up with, you know, I live in an area where if your development is near big transmission lines, your property prices go down. Could you imagine? You know, who's going to want to live near these things? Anyway, we're about out of time for this one.
I would just point out one last thing. There is an election cycle coming up in November. It'll be interesting to see how many local officials get turned out over data center issues.
We'll keep an eye on that. You're watching TechStrong, gang.
Discover TechStrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with TechStrong Group.
Hey folks, we're back, and something happened on the way to AI Nirvana, and it may be just the simple fact that a lot of this stuff is harder than anybody imagined. There's a new report out from OpenText talking about how 57% of folks now think that AI is a crucial project for them. That's down from other studies that had it up in around the 90%. And more interesting to me is at least 57% also said that it's just hard and they're not ready and they got a lot of work to do and there's a lot of data management issues. But Chris, did we kind of underestimate what's required here to succeed?
Of course we did. And for those of you who are watching this in clips, Alan set this up perfectly at the end of the last segment, because we're building the data centers, on the whole data center NIMBY issue. We're building the data centers today for today and yesterday, but the infrastructure is tomorrow. And this is the same issue, right? I'm talking to a monolithic AI. I don't know what I'm doing with it. It's using 8 million joules of power, to organize my calendar. And yes, but the marks of a successful wave, it's not just a blip, is no matter how bad the downsides are, we end up, doing the kinds of things we were talking about in the last segment. We work it out. So it's a mess. And I like this show because it gives me a sort of weekly reminder of where I've been on this path. And as we all know, as of June this year, the world has changed. It's changing month to month. The data center plans, I think they're intrinsically wrong. I said that on this show. I think we're building the wrong sort of hardware because we're thinking about it wrong. And we're not even looking in the future, a couple of years. You can run an AI on your laptop at home, right? On a small, it's not, but it's remarkable what it'll do. 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, this isn't all about data centers and big AI the way we're thinking about it. So there's so many ands to this, answer to yes to your question, that it's kind of hard to find a single place to stop.
Mm-hmm. Mitch, I seem to, I think it's been a couple of years now that we had some sort of hackathon that we were all running and you were at. And I remember looking at that and how amazed I was at how all these developers and people that I knew were really smart were wrestling with the fundamentals of data management. And I was like, it seems like maybe we'll have a renaissance in data management discipline and practices, but it feels like, a lot of people just don't have the grasp of data engineering and what's required.
Well, data is the new oil, right? But oil is sticky and messy. It's not always fun to work with. And that's the challenge is we don't really curate our data, comprehensively, so we can just dump it into a RAG or into some kind of a database that AI can use. I think the other part of it, Mike, is, and then how are we going to use it? How are we going to protect it? How is AI going to process it? What kind of applications are we using? I go back to the idea that AI is and will change everything. Well, that's a formula for, well, that's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, because when things change, you change how you work, you change how you think, how you solve problems. And while it may automate things and let you do more things, do more work for the output for the same amount of work, that doesn't come for free. So we're in this learning period, and it isn't the first time we've rushed headlong into the cloud or into blockchain or into fill in your favorite technology that maybe worked out in the end, but didn't deliver on every promise in the first 6 months of our wild appetites to adopt it. So data is something that I think is a discipline. Now I see job postings for more data scientists, more data curators, data analysts. People need that skill. So maybe we're doing a little less code writing, so we need more data people.
And in the article, it says, Barry says that context is king.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes me think with data as something I've always spoken about, like we have data swamps. And just like those swamps in Florida and the South, man, if you get in them, they'll kill you, right? And so the data is one big data swamp that's, going to kill us if we don't, really start to address, context. And I'm all for, this whole deep loading, right? How many times do I have to say I think we just have too much data, and in so doing, we are not able to manage it. And I don't care how much, we put towards it. I think we have to look at data differently instead of doing the same old thing that's just not working.
There's so much of this, in the last segment, I got to pull out the, old OT person saying, told you so, right? You don't put the money into the grid, you're going to get ants someday. Now we have ants, it'll cost you more. Okay, exactly what you just said. This is data science and information technology people for the last 50, 70 years saying, what we should be doing, and the practicalities of business are we don't. So we get swamps of data. And as we look at this, given the tools we have, given AI as it is, and these semantic systems that, give us, a lot of speed, and like Mitch, to your point, they speed up a lot. Now you might have more work to do, but you're doing more work. And what we have to do is the same sort of thing that we do internally in our heads or as cultures, is not save everything. Let me give you an example. We right now could wire up, and we are wiring up AIs with perfect recall of everything. And it turns out that doesn't work. Just like the same reason it doesn't work in your head. It's not because we're not good enough. It's because infinite information is nothing. It has no value at all. So curating our data sets and putting them in context where you can realistically actually use them, as opposed to just storing them, is, a told you so from every data scientist, I suppose, for the last 50 years, saying that's what you get for filing things this way.
Yeah. Boy, Chris, go ahead, Guy. Sorry.
There's always a lot of talk with new technologies, especially disruptive ones, that clearly this is like the most disruptive technology we've ever experienced. There's talk about complexity. And I'm hearing a lot that no one's used the word, so I don't want to put the word in anyone's mouth, but that taking advantage of AI in all its forms, whether development or just incorporation into services or apps or whatever, is there's a lot to think about. But I think actually there's a difference between complexity and difficulty. Something can be complex. It's hard to imagine complex and easy, but something that's really simple to imagine can be really hard. Like, for example, lifting a car with your own hands. That's really hard, but a simple action. So what I'm getting at is, and I keep coming back to the way AI is a simulation and not actual intelligence. And because it's a simulation and its design point is to simulate thinking, it's really hard to understand how to use it and develop it. We keep coming up against this with, I think, the actual experience of developing and using it having a disconnect from what the expectations were going in. I kind of felt like being all kind like be a slammer and go and say, oh, so I'm really surprised everybody sucks at developing AI. But I think that it's following the same kind of learning curve as everything else does. It's just because it looks like it's so promising. There's more frustration than there would be. I mean, what is it, 3 years now? And we have this huge proportion of enterprises trying to adopt and develop it. Maybe we just need a little more patience.
I think the point about expectations is exactly right? Because our expectation is the sci-fi, thing where you walk up, they find the ancient alien computer that knows everything, and it says, "I have considered every thought in the universe," and we expect that. But that's not even, when you think about how thought works, that's not logical. It's not possible for anyone. Billions of years from now, no one's ever going to be able to do that. That's not how thinking works. And we expect these AIs to do things that would do the superhuman model that we have in our head, which doesn't really exist. So it comes down to compression of information, not expansion, getting it down to small enough bits so you can reference it like we do in our heads. And, we've been modeling, I won't repeat it. You phrased it really well at the beginning of this. These are not intelligence, but they're a simulation of. So we're literally putting together code that simulates the parts of our brains and thinking about how that works. The compression that we use so we can access the infinite information of the universe and walk around, as agentic creatures, has a lot to say about what any AI we're going to create is even capable of. They can't do more than we can. That's not the way thinking works.
I think Kate's spot on, though. It is about the context, and I'll give you an example of something I was playing with last few days. I took the earnings call from a vendor, and I got the transcript, and I shoved it in the Chat GPT, and I had it, quote, craft a story. Then I listened to the actual earnings call myself, and I was, the facts were in the story, but the context was gone. There was no sense of where this all kind of fit or where it was in the larger economy. And then I kept playing with the prompts to kind of tailor it to what I needed it to be and adding more data and all this other stuff. And after like an hour, I was like, I'm spending an hour crafting prompts for something I could have done in like 15 minutes. And that's kind of where I'm like, yeah, this isn't quite where it needs to be.
But is that the AI's fault, or is it the transcript of the call's fault?
The transcript of the call was highly accurate. It was every word that was said in the actual meeting was in the transcript. It's just but the transcript doesn't capture tone. It doesn't capture any of the other.
So you're blaming AI for that?
Well, I'm not blaming it. I'm just saying, as a practical use case, though, it was still going to be faster for me to just look at the transcript or listen to the call and then craft something out of it than it would for me to sit around and tweak all these prompts to get to something that still wouldn't be 100%.
I think you're bringing
that's
up,
what I mean about the. Go ahead.
What you're bringing up is call it prompting or using AI in that way, just as it is for developers. It's a skill you've got to develop. I mean, we've all been prompting with Google, right? We figured out our little human algorithms of how to get, how do I get the LinkedIn page the easiest for somebody's name and company? I have a way of pasting that in really easy, and it'll come up usually first. It's on a much greater scale. There are different ways of prompting. There's like structuring things, highly structured JSON prompting. There's contract prompting, and people are discovering different models like different types of approaches. But it's around that context point that we brought up earlier. Is there's instructions, and then there's what we know about solving the problem or what we need to solve the problem, and how do we encapsulate that in some way to give the AI better direction, as well as.
I don't think this is a prompt engineering problem. I think, Mike, what you're really saying is AI doesn't pick up the inferences, the nuances, the humanity.
That's part of it.
Of how things are said.
It's a combination of all those things, right? It's partially what Mitch is saying, the prompts and the skills. And everybody on this call is pretty proficient with logic and how to put together prompts. it's, but do that in the average employee workplace, and those people are not going to be sitting around going, let me become a prompt expert. It's just not going to happen. And they're going to look at this stuff and go, this is kind of broken. And they're not going to drive it as hard as you think that they would.
That was a much nicer way of my reaction to what Mitch said. Mitch is taking a developer's and an engineer's approach to it, and that's 1% at best of the user population. It's just not a case of it just in general of using something that does work for you. I don't know, like it does do work for you, but it doesn't do good work for you. It just can't. It just can't. Here's what I'm getting at, Mike. You have been doing this for years. You're a journalist and editor and so forth. You know what a report's supposed to look like, and it's not what the AI produced. But you are also in a 1% or a 0.1% of the population. And other people who sit there and go, oh, well, I can produce a report. I'm going to start my YouTube. I'm going to start my own Substack, and I'm just going to AI the crap out of this stuff because I'm really interested in it, and I can produce volume. And a lot of the readership is not even going to know that it's not.
I think we call that AI slop these days, right?
But this is an example of the layers of the problems, because just that one thing, and Mike, we're building, a AI that can hear the tone right now. But imagine giving just a transcript of a meeting to an intern, as opposed to actually have them listen. When you take context and tone out, this is what you get. So it's not that LLM models or the use case, it's just that we have such a layer of inefficiencies and learning curves and dumb ways to do things.
So I disagree. Yes, we have a layer of inefficiency. You know what? It's called humanity. When you look at, and I love reading about Neanderthals and Denisovians, and how language and communication developed in humanity. It's not all from written languages. There were sounds, certain sounds, not words, conveyed certain things. If you said a certain word but also making a hand gesture, it changed the meaning of the word, right? This is how humans communicate. It's not all words. It's not just words. And unless we're going to make our AI savvy to that, you can't blame it for not being able to translate it, right? Until the point where we can have an AI watch the video, listen to the words, and and be able to make guesses at the inferences and the subtleties and the nuances. That's the difference between communication and words.
Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody's blaming AI here. I think we're just coming to a conclusion that, it has fundamental limitations, and I don't think we're abandoning it. But I think you really do need to think long and hard about how much time are you going to spend trying to prompt something out of it versus just doing it yourself.
That's the problem. It has fundamental limitations that are really hard for almost anybody to see.
All right, we're going to end it on that one. We'll come back. We've got more to talk about, guys. Let's talk about AI PCs. Garbage? I don't know. You're watching Tech Strong Gang.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey folks, we're back, and yes, we're talking about AI PCs. The Futurum Group has a new report out talking about what the latest rate of adoption is, and this is their second report on this topic. And well, not surprisingly, it may not be going as quickly as we thought, but there are people buying at least the lower end models of these things. Guy, tell us what's going on here with these things and where are we on this curve?
Well, terrific analysis by my colleague Olivier Blanchard, who's been covering AI and devices for since the beginning of this craze 3 years ago. One key thing to look at is that according to the research, something like 90% of IT leaders, or at least PC decision makers, think that AI PCs are worthwhile and the basic knowledge workers platform of the future, if not anybody using a PC. Why is that? Well, there's a craze going on. People are using AI. Just to be clear, I'm not going to define the AI PC exactly here, but it's something that can do inference on the PC and on the device. So that also points to the problem. And the problem, I want to pose the problem as a question to you, Mike. Actually, it's equally for Mitch or anybody, which is how come developers can't grok client server 40 years in? Why is it that when I'm using a mobile app, which this is what I've been complaining about for 20 years at least, and I go into a tunnel or out of a service area, suddenly the app stops working, even though I'm just doing something that, like maybe just writing an email or who knows what. They're better than they used to be, but somehow or other, we still wind up thinking that there's just one place, like the mainframe computer on this USS Enterprise, where everything happens. And in our case now, it's the cloud. So what Blanchard points out is that most AI is still developed and hosted and delivered from the cloud. So since AI PCs can't carry fiber with them wherever you go, there's a connectivity question and issue, because that fun neural net inference chip on the PC with its associated memory and hardware is just not being utilized. There's maybe a few dozen commercial off-the-shelf applications right now. I mean, some are really important and big, like Microsoft applications, Adobe applications, but there's really not very many that utilize it. And forget about where a lot of people and how a lot of people use apps right now, which is in SaaS. All of this processing is happening in big cloud data centers. So that's where the problem is. They're being adopted at a lightning pace. I think 90% is pretty high, but there isn't the software there for it. And frankly, I despair to a great degree of that happening anytime soon, because after client server, which was basically a way to overcome the limitations of the PC-based server at the time, ever since then, we've had the internet and we've had cloud and we've had all this stuff. And it just seems to be yet another way for developers to do the easy rather than the good, which is to have their cute little development environments and not worry about distributed systems. Go.
So, Guy, first of all, I want you reference the Star Trek Enterprise mainframe. I don't know if it was truly a mainframe. It was quantum. But the Daystrom, if you remember the episode, the Daystrom computer, the Daystrom Institute, remember they installed Mitch, remember the PhD fellow installed a beta of a new operating system, and it kind of went out of control. It reminds me of these AI. I forget what the computer had a name, and but it was kind of like an AI kind of thing. But in any event, I'll look it up and we'll put it in there. But let's cut to the chase. The AI PCs won't be valuable till there's a killer app for it. And right now there's not. Period, the end. There's no killer app. What am I getting on my AI PC that I'm not getting on my other PCs, Macs, or
Yes,
phones?
Thank you for saying that. That's a much better way to put it, which is the user doesn't know where the inference is happening. They just know that it doesn't work, and they're going to bang away at the thing because it's not working.
There's no.
So
there's
Mitch,
nothing to
wait
it.
a minute. Mitch, let's get Mitch in here for a minute, because what we're kind of saying is, software developers, Mitch's people are holding the whole show up. So what's up with that, my friend?
Here we go again. The famous words of Ronald Reagan. Blaming the software developers for the issue.
I thought you were going to go Donald Trump there for a minute.
Well, hey, that too. It is actually one of the big issues is, you just don't put hardware in front of it and always get a great, bump in performance or get a great new capability. You've got to have the software take advantage of it. And developers are learning how to build applications with AI, both in the cloud, but now that we've got this capability on the device, the best example is Apple, the one who's the farthest behind, at least publicly, right? They probably have had the most inferencing power on the devices that we use, that who knows what it's used for, but it's certainly not been elevated or accelerated their AI strategy. It's easy to dump on Apple right now. Maybe they'll have some meaningful announcements down the road around AI, but our software is still eating the world, folks.
That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I'm going to start using that instead of the subway I used to use. I go into the subway and my game doesn't work. That's an example. How many you still have Siri, even on the latest Apple hardware? Siri tells you I can't answer that right now. Why? Because every freaking time you ask it anything, it's got to go ping some server somewhere instead of just being able to do something locally. It just doesn't know how to do that. Why doesn't it know how to do that? With no is the wrong word. It was not programmed to do that. Why not? Mitch, tell me, why are developers not doing this? Is it just too complicated to think about two environments running an application? It's just client server. Where's the problem?
Well, networks are like the future. They're everywhere, but they're just uneven. And that's your problem in the subway.
I'm gonna take the opportunity, for three separate segments to say this is another "I told you so" thing, right? So we're gonna give people PCs, home PCs, with 8 trillion lines of code and settings, even at the the tab level where we actually have access to settings that none of us can decipher at all. And then that's how we get Anson, and that's how we get here. But I will say there was an open source project, Lumina OS. This is the last Windows device in my office here. That's still because I was tempted to switch over. But yeah, you have to start off an entire different stack and it operates differently. A PC hardware is totally hobbyist right now. You got to be totally into it. We'll see. Things are moving fast. Maybe in a year, people are running our open source take on it in a couple of spots in the world, and it seems to be going well. But it's, as we said in every other segment today, there are a lot of layers to this. It's not magic pixie dust. It will take a while to work through. But, as with power grids, as with, how we've been storing data, how we've been considering our personal device needs reconsidering if we really wanted to be smart enough to do LLM tests and things we expect, without some massive data center somewhere. But we can do it.
One thing that the hype cycles and the AI adoption curves don't properly represent is in this adoption curve, there's a point beginning of that curve where we're using the technology, the advanced technology, whatever it is, cloud, AI PCs, et cetera, AI, to solve problems in the way we solved it before we had that capability, right? We're using the same mental model of how we would apply it, or the same methods, same software that we're building. And there's a point like in the cloud where we realize that, I can do things a lot differently in terms of managing my infrastructure if I have, 3 times the amount of servers available when I do my upgrades. I can do rolling upgrades. I can do A/B testing and do lots of stuff that I weren't really possible before, just as one simple example. And you start to rethink and do things a little bit, sometimes greatly differently. We're still in this solving the way we've been solving it with AI. That's why, we struggle with prompting, Mike. That's why we struggle with, why don't our apps have better AI in them yet? Why don't we have apps with AI or apps that are AI? And why can't they connect? We're in the subway. All of this, we're in this early cycle. I'm not saying all those problems will be solved, at once, but it's an evolution. So we're wanting the benefit, and we're still solving problems the way we got here.
So do you think I'm being too pessimistic? Because I feel like this particular problem is different. That there's some cultural or mental disconnect, not mental, but there's some disconnect. Where, like I'm saying, like it requires development in 2 environments. That just seems to be one too many.
Yeah, I agree actually with Guy. I totally agree with you here, Guy. I mean, we need to. I don't know why we continue to even think about that whole 2-way relationship. I think it's just, let's start developing for that specific chip, for this AI chip on PCs and everything else. And Forget about legacy. Legacy is crushing us all the way around. I know
Spoken
it's
like a real Mac person.
Go.
And you can throw it out and rebuild from scratch fast. Among the things,
Let's get out of AI and Mac and all that stuff. What about WebAssembly? WebAssembly is a way to do exactly this.
Go WASM.
To put a package on and I'm like huge WebAssembly enthusiasm, probably because I like tilting at windmills. I mean,
I'm not sure which is harder, writing in WASM or building AI software, because they're both kind of difficult.
Well, I think we're going to have to continue.
Touche. Okay, fine.
I do have a question, though. I have a question for the group. So, who here thinks that they want to have, it's September, and believe it or not, the holidays are 2 months away. So who wants an AI PC for the holidays? Who's got that on their list? Anybody? Or are you going to wait till next year?
I want it.
There you go. There's the whole Kate just summarized the problem. We're all buying them because we're FOMO or something.
I already have 3 of them, not counting my phone.
Yeah, I'm just a big talker. Yeah.
More hardware is always good.
Now you guys can start to, now you know what to get me for.
All right, put it down on Kate's list. Guys, we got to wrap up here in 45 minutes, and we've got a lot of TechStrong TV to come today. Kate, Guy, Chris, Mitch, Mike, thanks for joining. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for TechStrong TV. If you're not watching this in our stream, feel free to go wherever you want after this, but I would suggest either the YouTube channel for TechStrong TV or the TechStrong.tv website, or if you have nothing to do, download the OTT app on Apple, Roku, Amazon, Google Play, and you could watch more like this till your heart's content. Until tomorrow, I'm Alan Schimmel. We're out.